think that you have to when they talk about an increase of enrollment is actually bad. In fact, you can turn their entire contention to the outside instead.
So the first speech of the debate round is called the constructive. It's a 4-minute speech, and basically your job is to build your tower. You're taking your evidence and you're reading off of a pre-written speech that was done before the debate tournament even began, basically where you read off all of the evidence and the arguments that you're going to be basing your case off of for the rest of the debate round. So at this point, your job is basically just to set up how you're going to win the round, what arguments you're going to use, and what evidence is backing up your arguments. Now, the important thing here is you're not interacting with your opponent at all. That's going to come a little bit later. Right now, your entire job is just setting up what you're going to be using. Next up, we have crossfire. Now, this is the first time you really interact with your opponents. You take a look at their case, some of the stuff they said, maybe some of the stuff that's a little bit shaky or a little bit sketchy, and this is your opportunity to attack it. Now, the important thing to note is you're not going to do any major damage to your opponent's case. These are just little details you're attacking, or maybe even just clarifying. And if you want to attack your opponent specifically, that's where you do it. If you want to really go for a big attack, you're going to wait for the next speech, which is again 4 minutes, and it's called the rebuttal. Now, this is where you go all out. Anything you have to say against your opponent's speech, this is where you use it. You try to take out their entire argument as much as physically possible, but be aware they're going to be doing the same thing to you. Don't focus on that, just attack them. Your defense comes in the summary. This is where you salvage the pieces of your case. So basically, a lot of your case isn't going to be usable. The responses are going to be so good that you just have to forget about it. Your job is to figure out what arguments are still usable within the round and build basically a new tower or a new case out of what's left. Your goal is that this case is going to be a little bit stronger and a little bit more responsive than the initial case was, because now you know what your opponents are going to say. And finally, in final focus, you win the round.
So the reason that my tower is winning in this debate round is because of the symmetry that it creates. And more importantly, when looking to the symmetry, we also have to look to how cute Waffles is. And Waffles is ultimately where you're going to vote for me in this round. It's because not only do I think that the tower has symmetry, but Waffles would also agree that this tower has symmetry. And because of that, it creates the most stability in this round.
So why my tower wins this debate today is because it has a stronger foundation, and the fact that my opponent thinks that his tower should win because it's symmetrical is non-unique, because my tower is just as symmetrical as his is. But as you can see, my opponent's tower is big, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, because I can easily knock it down because it's not as well built. And what you're not seeing right now, because my opponent doesn't provide you a link about his argument about Waffles, is that Waffles doesn't actually want to be with him right now, and he's actually being held under his will to be with my opponent. So you shouldn't take that as an argument, so you should vote for my tower at the end of this debate.
So in debate, arguments don't just pop out of nowhere. You rather string together a bunch of pieces of evidence to create your arguments. And there are really two ways that you can do this. The first way is you can just kind of throw all of your evidence and all of your citations into the case and just hope something turns out right, like this. Or you can build something like this, where you string together your arguments in a well-constructed and concise manner to create something that's a little more structured and easier to understand, like this tower.
We call this a contention. Notice how the contention has more of a central theme. In this case, the central theme is deficit harms. When we go over throughout the contention what deficit harms are and how those impact the round, given by citations, which are bolded and underlined in this case.
So when you're making your cases, you can think of it as there are two ways to form your arguments. And the first way is that you can just focus on one argument. And while that argument may be really good, in the long run, you're just going to have one really tall tower that is just one central argument. And what happens is when your opponent tries to attack it, it all just starts crumbling down, and you're left with nothing at the end of the day. Whereas the alternative method is having a couple more arguments that are really well built, and you have a more sturdy structure like this. So if you want to spread out your arguments more, it makes your opponent a harder time to attack the arguments, and it leaves you with a bit more structure at the end to work with as well.
So here we have two debate cases in front of us. Over here and over here. They both look pretty cool, but the problem is only one of them has anything to do with the actual topic. Over here we have our nice wood block construction. Over here it just kind of came out of nowhere. And that often happens when you're writing debate cases. You have arguments that look really good on the surface, but as you dive a little bit deeper, you realize it doesn't have anything to do with the topic. So when we're constructing cases, that's one of the most important things that we have to think about. How does the argument actually link back to what we're supposed to be doing? Either arguing for a specific side, or in this case, building a tower out of wood blocks.
Alright, so briefs for debate are essentially a big folder with a bunch of compiled research that are already there. So take this box for example. This box already has like a bunch of blocks in it, and it was here when I got to this house. And these blocks are individual pieces of evidence. So the thing about these blocks is that a lot of people have them, and they essentially have really similar cards to the same one as you do, or the exact same pieces of evidence that are in this folder. So while these briefs may be used as a starting point to your research, you probably shouldn't rely on them for every single piece of evidence in your case, because what this is going to do is that everybody's going to have your evidence, everybody's going to know how to argue against your evidence. So what you should essentially do is use these briefs as a place to catalyze your research, to direct you on where you want to go with your research, and to basically give you a push to start on a more complex level and a complex layer of your case instead. Alright, so let's pretend that this car right here is your opponent's argument, and this finish line is what your opponent is trying to get to. And once your opponent crosses this finish line, your opponent wins the debate. So you don't want your opponent to get past this finish line. So what can you do? Well, you can obviously block your opponent from getting to the finish line. Now to put this in debate terms, let's put it this way. If your opponent's argument is debt is bad, you can essentially use a block saying, no, it isn't. Now, to explain this more thoroughly, a block is essentially a piece of evidence that you would prepare before the debate, predicting what your opponent is going to say against your own case. So if debt is bad is a common argument for one of the resolutions, you would prepare this card from Paul Krugman from the New York Times that debt isn't bad. And essentially it just puts another piece of evidence between your opponent and your opponent's finish line. And what this does is that your opponent has to get past this other block to essentially win the debate. Now make sure your blocks are cited and prepared thoroughly so that you can use this very effectively in rounds.
Another way to think of blocks is in the form of a Nerf gun, much like the gun that we were using earlier. The way the blocks work is it kind of prepares you or gives you a loaded gun walking into a debate round, because in reality, if your gun's empty, you're not really going to do anything with it. That's why blocks are important. It's important to walk into the round knowing that you can do something with this.
In debate, there's two types of judges. There's a flow judge, which is usually a former debater. They care about content, they write down what you're saying, and they usually evaluate the round in the same type of mindset that you would. But then there's also lay judges, who are typically parents and teachers who might not have done debate before. These are the types of people that it's hard to adapt to, because you kind of have to frame the round in a simplistic sense, one that they can understand.
Alright, so this tower seems to be more structurally sound. It's really symmetrical, and it feels like there is a lot of traditional architecture put into this kind of tower. It's really nice looking, it's easy on the eyes, and it looks like it's really strong and stable. Whereas this one takes a little bit more time to process. It's a lot more abstract and you don't really know what it is. So at the end of the day, you can basically vote on a few things. You can vote first on presentation, where this one looks a bit cooler in a sense, but you don't really know what it is. And based on stability, this one is obviously the winner because it's a tower and it looks like it can stay up pretty well. So there are two different ways that I can vote this round, and so depending on what I feel is stronger, I can go either way.